For those of us living in the modern era, it is hard to imagine a time before all the information you could ever want was accessible right at your fingertips. Even with the advent of social media and 24/7 news coverage, there are hardly any events that have held the American populace's collective attention quite like the Iranian hostage crisis did in 1979. An event so groundbreaking that it disgraced a president, brought a revolution to America's living room, and changed the course of international politics forever. It's important to remember that with the popularity and affordability of the television growing for American consumers, events that the public would have historically only read about were now being shown in lifelike detail and happening in real time. Vietnam may have been the first conflict broadcasted on television, and Watergate the first political scandal, but the Iranian hostage crisis was the first international affair to be brought this close to home. Not only this, but the total 444 days that the hostages were held captive made it an ongoing daily story. Rioting as early as 1963 would see the Shah at the time, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, crack down on those who would oppose him politically. It just so happens that in the process of doing so, the Shah exiled the very popular religious leader, the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Unfortunately for the Shah, nothing he did in the span of time between 1963 and 1979 could quite swing the public favor back in his direction. On January 16, 1979, revolution erupted as the Shah's regime collapsed with him fleeing Iran forever. With the man who banished him gone, Khomeini saw the opportunity and took it, returning to the capital city of Iran, Tehran, in February of the same year. With his newfound political power, he used his influence to turn the popular discontent of the people towards the West, which quickly devolved into heavy anti-American ideals. The final straw for the radicalized followers of the Ayatollah was hearing that the exiled Shah took refuge in the U.S. under the pretext of being there for cancer treatment. They hardly accepted this explanation, opting instead to believe that the U.S. was sheltering someone who, in their eyes, was nothing short of a heinous criminal. At this point, the tension that had been rising for all this time reached the boiling point when on November 4, 1979, Iranian militants attacked the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and took all who were working there hostage. For the U.S., the delicate situation just turned from bad to catastrophic. President Jimmy Carter had only admitted the Shah because he believed the former political leader to be deathly ill, and the U.S. was the only country capable of treating him. What was seen as a spontaneous decision at the time would turn into a drastically unpopular one in the eyes of the American public based on the consequences. For Carter, promises of protections of the U.S. citizens at the embassy in Tehran were perhaps a stronger motivational force, promises that would soon be proven to be false, made worse by the realization that the militants who took the embassy were merely radicalized students. For the students who took the hostages, capturing and detaining foreign diplomats and citizens from a country as powerful as America was seen as a huge victory in challenging Western influence in Iran. In the eyes of the American public, however, a relatively unknown Middle Eastern country suddenly burst onto the scene in a big way, with all attention focused on it through the media. The public consciousness then turned to President Carter for action, who quickly showed that he had no real strategy to release the hostages. Desperate to do something, anything at this point, President Carter decided to launch the disastrous Operation Eagle Claw on April 24, 1980. As far as the Ayatollah was concerned, he believed the failure of the mission to be a divine intervention from God. He used this as a sort of divine proof that he and his new Islamic government were in the right of the situation. The result? Totaled military helicopters, the deaths of 8 U.S. servicemen, and any chance the disgraced president had at winning a re-election. Behind all of this drama, to little surprise, was the American media sensationalizing every ounce of information they got their hands on, even more so considering the entire situation had a heavy emotional side to it for the American public. They portrayed those holding the 52 hostages in captivity as simple terrorists, with no context as to why this might be happening in the first place. They cherry-picked the juiciest bits of information to sell to the public and paint a negative, generalized image of all Iranians that would persist in the American subconscious for years to come. The total 444 days dragged on and on through nightly media check-ins, alongside the constant falling of Jimmy Carter's approval ratings. Finally, on January 20th, 1981, the Iranian students released the hostages on the same day Ronald Reagan was sworn into office, after beating the defeated Carter in the election. The total amount of time that the students held the 52 hostages far exceeded what they or anyone else thought was possible. An unfortunate side effect of their perceived victory over the U.S. came with a new rising anti-Islamic sentiment in America, following the sensationalized portrayal of the ordeal by the media. Ultimately, the legacy of the Iranian hostage crisis in the U.S. represents the failures of the Carter administration and an American blunder on the world stage. For Iran, the relatively brief leverage they held over a Western superpower meant legitimizing their revolution and showing their true resolve as a people. In truth, even 40 years later, there are still a lot of lessons the modern government of the U.S. could learn about diplomacy and foreign affairs from this event and the failures of the past.